transisi energi untuk mendorong penggunaan energi terbarukan seperti panel surya di masjid dan penggunaan reaktor biogas untuk memanfaatkan kotoran ternak menjadi pupuk organik dan biogas. Penyebar luasan nilai-nilai pro lingkungan kepada jemaah melalui forum kajian dan ceramah. Advokasi masyarakat terdampak, yaitu mengorganisir massa untuk aksi bersama menentang proyek-proyek pembangunan yang merusak lingkungan. Sementara itu, mereka juga memiliki program kerja lingkungan yang variatif, seperti Eko Dakwah, Eko Ramadan, Eko Pesantren, Eko Haji, Eko Masjid, Wakaf Hutan dan Sedekah Energi, Manajemen Sampah, Edukasi Pertanian Islam, serta Kampung Hijau Energi. Sayangnya, gerakan Green Islam masih belum dikenal publik secara luas. Beberapa faktor internal yang melatar belakanginya, di antara lain, organisasi Green Islam di Indonesia masih terfragmentasi. Kondisi ini masih menghambat para aktivisnya untuk menginisiasi agenda lingkungan bersama untuk dapat mempengaruhi publik secara lebih luas. Sebagian besar kelompok Green Islam hanya merespon masalah lokal di sekitar. Sebagian kelompok Green Islam kurang mengoptimalkan sumber daya organisasi mereka. Sebagian lainnya memang tidak memiliki sumber daya yang kuat dan masih minimnya keterlibatan perempuan. Krisis lingkungan dan tantangan perubahan iklim mengingatkan kita untuk terus menjaga keseimbangan antara alam dan manusia. Gerakan Green Islam hadir sebagai harapan sekaligus pendorong agar kita turut ambil bagian dalam upaya melindungi bumi. Ini bukan hanya tentang melestarikan alam, tetapi tentang kelanjutan masa depan kita bersama. Menjaga bumi adalah wujud pengamalan ajaran agama dan rasa syukur kita kepada Sang Pencipta. Mari bersama-sama kita jaga alam ini demi masa depan yang berkelanjutan dan bumi yang lebih lestari untuk generasi mendatang. Let's act, react.
Attention, and a very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. Please kindly have your seats as the second day of the conference will begin in a few minutes. I warmly welcome you to the theater room located at the Faculty A building.
In case of emergencies, please remain calm and exit through the back end of the venue. We hope that you can set your phones on silence or vibration mode to keep the event conducive. Thank you.
A friendly reminder, don't forget to tag the Instagram accounts for all pictures taken throughout the event. Don't forget to follow the accounts of UIII and PPIM, UIN Jakarta, and we'll try our best to repost your pictures. Thank you for your attention and cooperation.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Welcome to the second day of the International Conference on Religious Environmentalism in Actions, Knowledge, Movements, and Policies. We highly appreciate your attendance today, and we hope you had insightful discussions, new perspectives, and productive sessions yesterday and today.
Our first agenda today is the second keynote speech session, and we humbly invite our panelists. First, we start with Prof. Gade, professor from University of Wisconsin, Madison. Prof. Anna.
Next, we have Professor Michiel Schaeffer, Adjunct Professor at the Masters of Public Policy on Climate Change, Universitas Islam Internasional Indonesia.
And next we have Prof. Frans Wijsen, Professor Emeritus, Department of Empirical Religious Studies, Radboud University.
Next, Dr. Iyad Abumoghli, Director of Faith for Earth Coalition, United Nations Environment Program. Okay.
Next, we have Prof. I.M. Halimatusa'diyah, Director of Research at the PPIM UIN Jakarta.
And last but not least, Dr. Sony Mumbunan, Head of the MPP Program on Climate Change, Universitas Islam Internasional Indonesia, as the moderator. Let's give a final round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. To Dr. Sony Mumbunan, the time is yours.
Thank you, moderators. Good morning, everyone. So this is the last day of the conference. Happy to see you again here. This is the first session of the day, but I'm sure this will be one of the interesting part of the whole conference. Thank you for the organizer of having me. I'm Sony Mumbunan, we call it Kaprodi, so the head of the program study of the MPP, the Master of Public Policy, focusing on climate change at this beautiful university in Depok. I'll be moderating the session. Actually, it's a set of keynote speeches, so there will be 5. Persons, one joining us online. We have here 4, and I would like to introduce all of them, and then we'll give time for them to deliver their keynotes. We have here Ibu Anna Gade. I'll call Ibu Anna, and Pak Michiel, just to be more, collegial rather than professors. Yes. I hope you're okay, Ibu Im. So Ibu Anna, we are very lucky because Bu Anna has been part of the MPP program, especially this academic year. I see some students here taking different class offered by Ibu Anna. Ibu Anna is the Vilas Distinguished Achievement Professor at Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies at the University of Wisconsin in the US. She, as mentioned, a visiting professor this year, and we hope she will be with us also in the coming years. That's plural, Bu Anna, years, hopefully, not only single year visit. She has position at different university. I can mention here Cornell University, Princeton, Victoria University, Wellington, and also at UGM in Jakarta. As a PhD in University of Chicago, and many of us know her from the book Muslim Environmentalism, Religious and Social Foundation, published by Columbia University Press. But Professor Anna engagement is way earlier than that, and starting from at least the Indonesian Southeast Asia, including the publication on the Living Quran in South Sulawesi, in southern Sulawesi in the 1990s. Ibu Anna, welcome to the session. If you don't mind, I will introduce all of the speakers, all the keynotes, and then we'll give you the time. Next to Bu Anna, we have Pak Michiel. Pak Michiel Schaeffer. Pak Michiel also has been with the MPP program at the university here. Pak Michiel is a lead science advisor and co-founder of Climate Analytics. It is an organization in Germany. He is a chief scientist at Frans in France, and a senior fellow at the Copernicus Institute of Sustainable Development at Utrecht University in the Netherlands. He's a biophysicist by training, but have been working in many different areas of climate science, energy system analysis, mitigation and adaptation. Pak Michiel has been advising, if you look at the publication and report, amazing engagement in areas of science policy interface, both for developed countries but also for developing countries. Welcome, Pak Michiel, Pak Frans. I asked Pak Michiel how to call it the name, and it's supposed to be Pak Frans Wijsen. Correct me if I'm wrong. Pak Frans is an Emeritus policy professor. I talked to Pak Testri. Pak Frans has been probably considering living in Jakarta. That will be very nice, Pak, because of the proximity to Depok, so we can keep inviting you to come and visit us here. Pak Frans was with the Department of Religious Studies at Radboud University in Nijmegen in the Netherlands, an adjunct professor at the Graduate School of Gadjah Mada University, and the very reason perhaps why he want to spend more time in Jakarta. He studied theology and social sciences in Nijmegen and Nairobi, and among of the prominent publications of Frans is the Seeds of Conflict in Heaven of Peace and the Discourse Social Cohesion Conflict, published by Oxford University Press. Welcome back to the session. We have Pak Iyad Abumoghli will be joining us online. Okay, and Pak Iyad is with us already, or will be joining later? Okay. Okay, so Pak Iyad is a distinguished person when we talk about environmental leadership and sustainable development. At the moment, he is a director of the Faith for Earth Coalition, is under the United Nations Environment Programs, UNEP. Has a long career spanning 40 years, more than 40 years in different UN leadership positions. By training, he's an engineer, so having a Ph.D. in environmental engineer. But as I mentioned earlier, the career at UN, and he's also part of graduated from the UN Virtual Development Academy. So we'll be hearing a lot from him and his authority when it comes to environmental governance. Pak Iyad, welcome to, I hope you already joined with us there. The next one we have Ibu Im Halimatusa'diyah. Ibu Im is a bit jauh, but also dekat to UIII for various reasons. Ibu Im is the professor of sociology at Islamic State University, UIN Syarif Hidayatullah here in Jakarta. She's a deputy director of research at the Center for the Study of Islam and Society, or PPIM, at the University of UIN. She served as visiting senior fellow at the Regional Social and Cultural Study Program at Yusuf Ishaq Institute, you probably know it as ICS. A former awardee of both Chevening Awards and Fulbright Presidential Scholarship. She has a PhD in sociology from Iowa State Universities. Welcome, Ibu Im. We will be having keynote speeches, like 5, so bear with us. 15 to 20 minutes, you don't have to spend 20 minutes, so somewhere in between will be great. And then we'll be having like an hour Q&A, so no worries. We will collect as many questions as possible. Pay attention to the keynote speeches and then come up with your questions. So I'll invite Ibu Ana to give a speech. Thank you, Bu Ana. Please, yeah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'm so excited to be here. I've been waiting for this for months. I've delayed my return to the United States just so I can be here at this amazing event. So first off, I want to acknowledge the honored guests who are here, my colleagues, my friends, my students, and whoever else may be watching this here or at another time or place. I want to especially acknowledge my old dear friend, Dean Fakhruddin Mangunjaya, who for some reason is in the back there, who was, no longer, who has been instrumental in my own research and in developing this field since the very beginning in Indonesia and globally. So thank you to, thank you to PPIM, to IIIU. I'm amazed at how quickly this REACT project has come together, with all of its outputs under the support of the Dutch Embassy, and I'm looking forward to much, much more. So the book was mentioned. I heard somebody talk about my book yesterday, mashallah. So let me just tell you about the book, because I'm not going to talk about the book in my short time today. Pak Sony, I timed my presentation 18 minutes. Okay, see how we do. So quickly, just about this book, it came out 5 years ago, and already it's part of a fast developing field. Let me just give you a quick overview. The book moves from talking about how Islam is being employed for environmental goals to how pious Muslims engage environment to achieve religious aspirations. And the book takes the structure of Islamic studies with perspectives from Indonesia figuring prominently. It actually started because I was doing work among Cham Muslims in Cambodia about 20 years ago, but that's another story. So just quickly, some main points are, it starts by recognizing the role of secular and national development, like here, and their frameworks with some development critique, nothing too special, recognizing that these hybridities are all authentically Muslim. The next chapter on Quran and its contextual study shows that keywords don't convey environmental meaning for the whole text. The law chapter considers how legal rulings and theories shape Islamic activism and ethics, looking at things like how ritual law can analogically develop approaches to symbol and reality, forms of legal reasoning, and then mechanisms like fatwas. There's new mechanisms that people are developing here at this university and elsewhere, like Islamic finance, and so on. Another chapter presents historical perspectives on science and what could be called eco-theology, according to our Ministry of Religious Affairs here in Indonesia. And overall, the book shows how Islam decolonizes environmental humanities, like with a critique of settler colonial ideas like a nature concept. And that's kind of my old business to work out. Since then, I've been thinking a lot about how to ground the study of Islam and environment in environmental studies. So I've written about how Islam connects with ideas at the cutting edge of activism. This is an article, it's open access if you're interested in the Muslim world. And since this year, when I've been at IIIU, I've been talking about how ideas like conservation, sustainability, and climate produce differing scientific and ethical discourses, and how this can possibly matter, for example, for public understandings like the case of ormas and mining, and certainly for tasks like developing new environmental education in Indonesia. This year has been amazing. Today, I want to talk about something new that's come out of my time here. I hope it will be premium content for Studia Islamica, inshallah. And it comes out of the book project on environmental ethics that I've been finishing up this year on my sabbatical year. This specific topic also comes out of the opportunity to teach climate ethics in the climate change program here, and I have been so proud to work with these students in Depok and the Global South. I've learned so much from and with them, and so have you. They've been very active in this conference, including this afternoon. All right, here's the theme for today. I want to talk about future generations. Now, this is familiar from environmental studies languages since the beginning, and the beginning is technically like only 50 years ago, especially with crisis thinking. So, for example, the fraught, problematic issue of population in the mid-20th century is, in a sense, about future generations, right? The idea of future generations also figures prominently, even fundamentally, in sustainability. This is the case with SDGs and the Brundtland Report from 1987, which asks us to sustain something for someone, and usually that's said to be future generations. The idea is also fundamental to indigenous systems, like with the 7th generation earth ethics that I'm familiar with from Anishinaabe traditions where I live in the upper Midwest of North America. Finally, the idea of future generations is central to climate expressions. It's a notoriously difficult, if not impossible, area for philosophical ethics. Why? Because the subjects don't exist. This is sometimes called the non-identity problem. It's kind of a classical paradox. At the same time, futurity can't be avoided with climate. And the matter isn't just theoretical, it's empirical. It's a policy question too. Future generations pose practical and insurmountable problems with climate adaptation, mitigation, and emissions targets. A point I'm going to talk about today, that this is an area in which religious ethics can develop a register for apprehending the problem, if not the solution, where metaphysics become material. So here's a little philosophy for y'all. This is what I've been teaching here. I'll go through it quickly, but I think some of the points are actually pretty clear and pretty intuitive. Everybody seems to agree that future generations should matter, but are hindered by the lack of resources for really understanding what does that mean. The issue of intergenerational justice has been addressed in thoughtful work in English by Derek Parfit, like in his Reasons and Persons, but many call this a neglected question. In his well-known theory of justice, in a book called, wait for it, A Theory of Justice, John Rawls included the idea of future generations, but a lot of people have found that his idea of justice as fairness, even with his understanding of difference and disadvantage, isn't adequate because it can't accommodate intergenerational justice. The general conclusion is what Rawls probably would mean is a kind of a just savings, like you store up for the future, like you save stuff for your kids. Philosophers aren't satisfied with this, though, this kind of like hypothetical contract with the future, because first off, there's the problem of capacity, like do you have something to save? And additionally, there's this motivation problem, like acting on behalf of future generations means acting for their sake is a self-transcending concern. This is a classic moral paradox, right? Like, why would you do something in your own, why is it in one's best interest not to act in one's best interest? Like, why not just be a jerk about it? Even more questions remain. Some of them are up here. This is like philosophers really getting in the weeds. But here from Ernest Partridge, I think it's important to note that the standard approach in environmental ethics, I heard a lot about it with Maura earlier this week, to recenter anthropocentrism is to extend the idea of community beyond the human. That's cool, but it doesn't work in this case for like some of these reasons that are on this slide right here. Like, future generations are a category, they're not people. Do you even know what they want? They're in a non-reciprocal relation to you, et cetera, et cetera. So folks like Partridge, this guy I'm citing right here, claim, as do many others, that this requires a moral overhaul, like a total rethinking, and climate makes that all the more the case. Let's talk about future generations now and climate policy for a minute. Climate change has changed over time, and so have climate ethics. But a couple of things haven't changed about climate ethics. One is a point I like to make about environment in my work. Folks say it about climate all the time, that all choices are moral. There's no avoiding that. Another thing that hasn't changed is that philosophers recognize that previous nature-based ethics, like respect nature, like Paul Taylor, also don't really work because they're not global justice or moral responsibility concepts. There's other problems too. So you have to start from scratch in some ways, and climate makes that especially difficult. There's this dispersion, isn't there, of cause and effect. There's a fragmentation of agency over space and time, and then there's institutional inadequacy, as we've seen with the negotiation of agreements. Because of all of this, including the skewed vulnerabilities or issues of environmental justice, climate justice has gone through a few phases trying to work this out. Stage one was like the discovery of climate. It was like a shock. This is all new. It's no analog. People wondering how to think it through, like Henry Shue in ethics, Amitav Ghosh with the Great Derangement, Deepesh Chakrabarty in history with his 4 theses. But you know, that shock of crisis thinking has worn off, and many indigenous communities and communities of color wonder if there really wasn't the case that the crisis had already occurred. There's also an issue of uncertainty, which has endured in the politics of climate denial, but that wasn't so much a matter for ethics, where the question was not so much uncertainty, but responsibility and risk. And so now moving into stage 3, I want to talk about responsibility and risk, because this is where climate ethics really begins to have some difficulties. Real quick, the expectation is generally that there's going to be some cumulative carbon budget, like a threshold, that future generations need, like a limit, like 2 degrees centigrade of global warming. And then the question begins how to consider that looking backward, frames in terms of nation states, considering, for example, that some nation states might be more responsible for the mess they made that others have to live with. In general, there's 2 approaches to this. You'll learn about this when you study in the MPP program of climate change here at IIIU. One is called the polluter pays principle, which is the idea that the people who are responsible for the mess should pay more. And then the other looks more at beneficiaries, looking at carbon as a sink, as a capacity to be able to use, and that some countries should be allowed to use more. Ethically and politically speaking, these are questions of global justice, the distribution of burdens and benefits. And there's numerous challenges to this, including thinking about past generations, but in my short time here, it won't surprise you to think for just a minute about the challenges of monetization and cost-benefit analysis that tends to factor out morality from policy, never mind corruption and non-compliance and that kind of thing. So a lot of philosophers propose these kind of arbitrary rules. Instead of trying to work things through like John Locke, they simply say, do no harm, or be good, or help the future generations, which end up being kind of unsatisfying. And then with risk, climate ethics really sort of dissolves into an existential abyss. Risk has long been central to environmental thinking and assessment. Think about like disaster planning. But here, climate ethics breaks down. I'm not going to take time to tell you about how there's all different kinds of risks and there's magnitude of risk, but you can understand here that climate impacts in terms of risk are going to be different from other environmental realities. Like the lag between cause and effect is hundreds of years. CO2 stays in the atmosphere for a really long time and doesn't go away. There's temporal fragmentation in terms of actors, like how can generations work together, much less like movements globally, although we're trying. And in an intergenerational sense, countries are biased toward the current generation anyway. So here the ethicists worry. Henry Shue discusses this forced choice, like Sophie's choice. Depending on what choices are made now, all choices for future generations are bad for them. Shue talks about moral thresholds. According to him, we're not talking about risk anymore, we're talking about danger. And no probability is acceptable. In fact, he proposed shifting from the idea of risk to danger and danger to desperate dangers, saying this is the most essential precaution and it's a grievous wrong, it's really bad to do anything else. Okay, so mic drop for Henry Shue. Now what? And how does this translate into something that we can actually think about, apprehend, and work with in our daily life? This is where religious ethics come in, and this is where I'm going to end my short presentation today. So, philosophical ethics as norms for philosophy and even for policy can't work around responsibility and danger with climate, and it's a no analog problem. However, there's a separate strand of ethics in the same Euro-American tradition that I know, and it's cognate to Muslim systems that I've studied. It's a different level of conversation. Now, religious ethics is usually a form of meta-ethics. You're looking at a lot of things at once, sometimes stepping back for them rather than arguing directly about norms, although you can do that. Sometimes it's called comparative, although that's not really figuring out what's better, that's just looking at difference. And anthropology does a lot of this if you want to know where to find it. Even if you're secular, or even if you're non-religious, or even if you're not working in your own religion, religious languages are helpful around issues like climate that can't be apprehended any other way except through symbols. Think of the picture of that polar bear on the melting ice cap, right? And religion excels at these kinds of symbols. Also, religious cosmologies, religious viewpoints, worldviews, have an imagination that can expand to the scale of the global and the planetary and to Alamin, even more than that. And religion can be about the unseen, so it's a good fit. With this, I want to turn to just one way of, oh, I guess my spell check didn't like the Arabic. I just want to turn to one example from Quran to talk about how religious ethics might provide a way, at least to begin to grapple with these questions about climate ethics. So when I talk about Islamic ethics, I don't mean the akhlaq tradition necessarily, although I could. I don't just mean the Quranic treatment or presentation of catastrophe or, the Day of Judgment in the Quran, although that's certainly relevant to trying to imagine a climate disaster. I am talking about moral teachings about denial, forgetfulness, corruption, complacency, and Quranic depictions of future generations and intergenerational responsibility are vivid, as you know. They're not just descriptive, they're voices that emerge, that talk, that actually shout across apocalyptic space and time throughout the text. At Judgment Day, as you know, even the earth, al-ard, itself testifies when the dead come to life and the future comes to bear on the present literally as a moral reckoning. Now, this is a really different register from like climate grief or climate hope, which comes in the post-Christian tradition, kind of Victorian sentiments, right, that we hear about a lot. Here, we're talking about being beyond hope and in a conversation already in progress. And I think there's some hope in that. So I just gave you like one verse here to indicate this. There's many in the text. قال أدخلوا في أمم قد خلت من قبلكم من الجن والإنس في النار. And the verse goes on here. I'll switch up to English for a minute. Allah will say, enter the fire along with the groups of jinn and humans that came before you, like that's what I just said. Whenever a group enters the fire, it curses the preceding ones until they're all gathered inside. And the followers say to their leaders, "Oh Lord, they misled us." How? So multiply their torment in the fire. And then he will answer, it's already multiplied for all of you. وَلَكِنْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ, and you still don't understand. This shows that these relations have consequence, what I call elsewhere consequential relations in my work. The intergenerational cosmology is affirmed elsewhere in the Quran, like with the day of Alast, Yam Alastu, in the same surah, right, of Al-Araf. The deep time of the Anthropocene becomes the temporalities of judgment here, and it's absolutely relevant to the scale of climate disaster. You don't need to be terribly Sufi to register this notion of Ibn al-Waqt in an ultimate sense. So just to conclude, I think this indicates an alternative register even for policy outside of the Lockean tradition, because we need some kind of imagination for this, as Henry Shue has clearly proven. And I think that you don't even need to confirm confessional faith commitments to recognize this and that this is a relevant register. Finally, it opens the possibility of considering other worlds, other ummas, and other communities like you, to reference the verse from Surah Al-An'am, it's verse 38. Allahu Akbar. God knows best. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you so much, Ibu Anna. That was very interesting and engaging. Thank you. So just a quick account, very interesting, Ibu Anna. I believe I myself learned about this, sort of locating in some of the approach when it comes to climate ethics, but I like the idea in the beginning you provided and say this is a non-identity problem, which is very interesting because we don't need to invent, but we need to address something that is not really there. And thanks for sharing with the different areas and approaches on philosophical issues, climate ethics, and bringing this into the connection to climate. I have some notes, but I think the last one is very critical. And also the multiplication and the very implication of something that we have led into. And maybe you can also discuss later whether I understood it or we understood it correctly, that it doesn't even imply faith recognition to, I mean, it can be approached from different faith. There will be time for that. We'll discuss and deep dive deeper into this. Let me move to Michiel. Michiel, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sonny. Thank you very much, Professor Anna. I really like those thought-provoking ideas that you put forward, or reflections. And I think there's a lot to discuss here. My presentation is about the physical climate sciences and how we connect that to which elements overlap with religious practices, ethics, and just to prepare for the discussion later, I thought of a lot of the ideas that you just presented. I think there's a dire need for more deep thinking to play a role in the UN climate negotiations, because what I've seen, what I've observed over the past 20 years or more of climate negotiations is that a lot of these ideas, these concepts, they get weaponized, mobilized for personal gain, for political gain, right? And they get sort of flattened out until very trivial points being made by country delegations for their, let's say, political gain. And if there is a way to enter to more deep thinking, I think that would be really, really important. And that's something that we may discuss later, how to achieve that. Okay, so I will focus more. I'm an atmospheric physicist by training. I've been working with the climate negotiations, as I mentioned, for over 20 years. So I will approach this from my own scientific background and then try to make the connections with faith-based organizations in particular. That means that I will start with more of the bad news, where is the urgency of the climate crisis. I will make a lot of points that my students, some of are here, have heard before. And so we can make this a test and see how much you remember of what we have taught you the past 2 years. I hope it's a lot, so I hope you will be bored by repetition. So I'm going to start here. This depicts different scenarios of global warming. We have observations up till roughly the present, and then for the future we have a range of scenarios because human behavior is very unpredictable. We don't know what will happen when we have low emissions or high emissions. Obviously, we're working globally to reduce these emissions as much as possible and then hopefully get to warming levels that are represented by these lower scenarios here. But there is still a risk of a breakdown in global approaches, global climate action mitigation, which may end up leading the world to much higher levels of warming. So we have levels of warming in these scenarios from 1.5 degrees, as in the Paris Agreement, to below 2 degrees, to a risk of warming of 3 degrees or even more. So at the moment, human-induced global warming has taken us to about an average of a long-term average of 1.2 degrees above pre-industrial, as we call it. So the start of when we started to emit greenhouse gas. Now, last year, 2024, we had 1 year annual mean temperature exceeded 1.5 degrees for the first time. That doesn't mean that the Paris Agreement is lost of the 1.5 degree limit, because that's about the long term. And we know that, you can also see that in the observations, there are natural fluctuations from year to year on top of the long-term trend by human-induced global warming. So 1 year doesn't breach the Paris Agreement, but the longer we wait with even more climate action mitigation, the closer we get to actually breaching the 1.5 degree limit of the Paris Agreement. So the Paris Agreement is 1.5 degrees and well below 2 degrees, so roughly in this area of warming. Now, we have, my organization, we have been analyzing and tracking climate policies on mitigation for countries worldwide since 2009. And every year we collect all the information of what countries are promising to do, limiting their greenhouse gas emissions. We add it all up together. We run it through our energy economic models to see what it implies for emissions in the rest of the century. Then we run it through our climate models. And then we get to projections, estimates of what all of those policies globally imply for global warming by the end of the century. And what we see is that we're still, with all of those promises and commitments by countries and their policies, we still end up at 2 to 3 degrees of warming by the end of the century. Now, why is that a concern? The IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, to which we have also been contributing, does these huge assessments of all the science on climate change every 6 or 7 years. And so from the most recent report, published in 2022, all of that knowledge that we have of how the climate system works and what to expect in the future is collected in these overall reasons for concern. And there's a level of risk represented that reflects for each level of global warming how serious the crisis would be for those parts of our global economy, our planet, our people. And so first of all, for unique and threatened systems, think of niches of biodiversity, think of unique cultures in vulnerable parts of the world, think of coral reefs. Many of those will be at very, very high risk, even at 1.5 degrees, which means that even today, they are a very high risk. There are damages happening. Climate crisis is not something for the future, it is happening today. Now, this is also seen in recent work that we have done over the past few years in the risk of extreme heat for Hajj pilgrims. So with our colleagues in Europe, in Pakistan, we've been looking at, so we already observe these things happening. We see every year hundreds, if not thousands, of pilgrims perish. And often these are older individuals who still have the opportunity to go to Mecca. And we know that more older people have a higher risk of fatal heat stroke under extreme humid heat. And our findings show that at 2 degrees of warming, heat stroke risk would increase 10 times compared to today. So if we don't get climate change under control, this would imply a very extreme escalation of risk for pilgrims that therefore we need to adapt to. We need to prepare for this. We also looked at Ramadan. We also know that during Ramadan, people also run a higher risk. Again, the elderly people are most at risk. Abstaining from drinking, abstaining from food makes one more vulnerable to extreme heat. And so with our colleagues, we've looked at the dates of Ramadan over the next years. We've looked at scenarios of global warming, and we've analyzed in which countries during Ramadan, we will have a very high risk during Ramadan in which years in the future. And we expect by 2040 or the late 2030s, a rapid increase in the risk in a lot of very large countries in the world with a lot of Muslims. So that gives us now 10 to 15 years to prepare for this wave of risk that we are anticipating. So it's a wake-up call, not just for Saudi Arabia, but also for all countries with major Muslim populations. We have 10 to 15 years to protect our populations. It doesn't stop there, of course. This research that we did was for Muslims, but the same goes for other religions. And so other researchers have looked at damage to places of worship. We have looked at religious symbols. For example, some flowers play a very large role in Hindu rituals. And these same flowers, they don't grow anymore with extreme heat. Another study looked at Ethiopian Orthodox Christianity. They observe a total of 165 days of prayer, fasting, and other activities. That means that they won't be able to work on the land, for example. Farmers will not be able to protect their seedlings against drought. So how do we deal with this kind of impact that is unprecedented, but people will, of course, still want to observe their religious practices? And then finally, we also started to look at things that impede travel. We often go with holy days or holy periods. So how does climate change affect or impede travel? So all of these things we need to invest more research in to finally recommend then actions to protect people. I also want to bring up equality. Again, in the UNFCCC negotiations, equity is often brought forward to say, well, actually, some people need to invest more in reducing greenhouse gas emissions, in decarbonization, in a just transition, and so on, than others because they are responsible. And other people, they don't need to do anything because they are not responsible. I would argue that I would like to make a moral appeal that everybody is obliged to do something, but not everybody needs to pay for it. So the capacity to pay for all of these measures still rests firmly with the big polluters in history, which are developed countries. But it doesn't mean that the rest of the world doesn't have to act. They do, just not paid by themselves, but by the rich countries. One reason this is important is also because it relates to equity on the other side of the coin. We have equity in mitigation, the polluter pays principle and other of these concepts, but we also have equity and inequity on the impact side. It's actually the poor people in every society that suffer most because their houses are built in more exposed areas. They don't have the cash reserves to recover from a natural disaster, etc., etc. They don't have the political agency. And what we see is that the impacts of climate change make those inequities worse. So after a disaster, poor people are almost always worse off than richer people. It doesn't matter at which country you look. Another element of impacts related to inequity is in migration. We know that climate change is almost never the sole cause of people migrating. It is an amplifier of existing conflicts, of existing socioeconomic situations, etc., etc. But as such, these triggers, they happen more and more often because of global warming. And here as well, there's an ethical and equity dimension because migrants often are in the new places they end up, they need to settle, they need to conquer a new economic position. They are more vulnerable, they are more poor than established populations. So again, climate change makes existing inequities worse. Now, What are we doing about it? This is a history of climate negotiations. I won't go through this in detail, but we have an evolving understanding of what level of global warming do we need to limit to make the planet still livable and equitable. And so we've seen an evolvement of language in international agreements that slowly moved to finally the language in the Paris Agreement of well below 2 degrees and limit to 1.5 degrees. So this is based on decades of negotiation and decades of scientific research. Now, we had Baku, the COP, just last year. This was one of the worst COPs I've ever been at. The COP is the conference of the parties. It's a negotiation setting of all the countries assembled under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. So this is where it happens. This is where we need to solve the crisis. The COP in Baku was one of the worst I've been. Very, very little progress for many, many reasons that we can discuss. So I have a hope that the Brazil diplomat team, which is working hard to prepare for the COP in November this year, will do a much better job. We know the Brazilian government very well and their delegation team, and I have a lot of confidence in the upcoming COP. Now, how to motivate people? A lot of other speakers, they will talk about this also, including from the religious practices. I want to bring up the work that has been done in the scientific community on the overlap between, or the synergy between mitigation actions, different technologies, different measures, and other elements that are important for people, which we often refer to as the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. So a lot of considerations of, again, equity, but also health, food, access to water, good jobs, etc., etc. There are synergies with the technologies that we need to limit our greenhouse gas emissions. So research how this pans out for communities, for villages, for cities, for countries remains very important. Now let's switch to adaptation, because a lot of my research is focused on impacts and adaptation. Again, what we see here is an unequal situation between high-income groups and low-income groups within countries. What you see here is for different sectors of impacts and different world regions, the status of adaptation in blue for high-income and low-income groups. So in every single region, we see that high-income groups in the country are better adapted to the negative impacts of climate change than low-income groups. In terms of planned policies to increase adaptation, that's indicated in orange, we see that in some regions, some sectors, a lot is being invested to protect high-income groups even more. But we also see in most regions that there are decent plans to invest in adaptation for lower income groups, but not everywhere, and that is still means a big risk for low income groups. Finally, what we also see here is, and that's a very important point that often people forget, even with everything that we can do to limit our greenhouse gas emissions, to limit the level of global warming to 1.5 degrees or below 2 degrees, we need adaptation. And even with all the adaptation that we can mobilize, it doesn't prevent all damages. So you see, in particular for low-income groups, a limit to what adaptation can achieve in the very light color orange, let's say. And this is the topic of loss and damage that is becoming more and more important as a political topic, including in the UN negotiations. And that, again, we need research to understand what's going on and how it relates to our aims to protect our people. On adaptation, we need money. It's very trivial, but we need it. Global finance flows on climate 87% of this is going to mitigation. Only 10 to 15% is going to adaptation. It should be roughly 50-50. That's also what has been agreed under the UN negotiations, but it is not. We also see that in mitigation we have a large role of the private sector. So there's a good business case now in many countries where green technologies are cheaper than fossil fuel-based, and that's expressed in the fact that now more than half of finance in mitigation, investment in mitigation, are coming from the private sector, and less than 50% is coming from the public sector. In adaptation, that's not the case. A very, very small part is from private sector. Even so that most adaptation is left to individual households, individual people. So the average citizen is investing more in protecting themselves than the private sector. That's not how it should be. We cannot leave that responsibility to individuals. So we need to make a business case to the private sector that investing in adaptation is a good thing. And so we need to frame the topic, and again, this is where faith-based organizations can play a role, to help with translating into the language that other people, in this case the private sector, understand. There is a positive benefit to cost ratio to many investments in adaptation. Companies just don't know about it. So here we need a very important push to mobilize the private sector. Now I want to end with the UN negotiations. I mentioned it a few times. Every year we have all of these countries coming. They put forward their individual countries' interests. That's what they're there to do. And we're hoping that together they will solve the climate crisis. But we also have other actors present at the negotiations. Lobbyists for the fossil fuel industry, yes, but also environmental NGOs, development NGOs, as well as faith-based organizations. And so they can play a really important role in these negotiations, working with countries that share certain principles on ethics or morality or religion. So I want to end with some observations, some learnings that our organization has achieved over the past years, attending, participating in the UN negotiations, working with individual countries on their climate strategies globally. We work in, well, we have offices actually on all continents, including in Asia and Southeast Asia. So I want to start with awareness raising. Faith-based organizations can play a real big role in awareness raising, education, public campaigns. Next, promoting 1.5 degree compatible action. So working with national and subnational governments to add their voice to what is needed to prevent dangerous climate change. Mobilizing the private sector. This is sometimes, as I mentioned, it's overlooked, but it's absolutely essential, it's critical to solve the climate crisis. Then engaging in international interfaith collaboration. I mentioned the UNFCCC. I also want to mention the G20. It is an important international forum that I think faith-based organizations could play a bigger role. And for example, the current president, South Africa, they have their theme of solidarity, equality, and sustainability, which should resonate with a lot of the philosophies and principles within the different world faiths. Strengthening academic exchanges and collaboration, I think it's very important. And then just a few examples of more specific things that need to be done to protect religious practices around the world. Early warning systems for extreme heat, cooling centers, building them during extreme heat. That also has to be related to bolstering resilience of the energy network. Sometimes when there's a disaster, we can have a failure of the electric system, so air conditionings don't run anymore during times of extreme heat. Improving green space and other measures in the urban areas, protecting outdoor workers, both in cities as well as in rural areas, and then improving health systems, including pressuring Saudi Arabia to improve the health systems in the region of the Hajj pilgrimage. And then not just for official registered pilgrims, but also take measures to protect unregistered pilgrims. And this, because this is again a situation of inequity. Some people, they have to go to Mecca unregistered, and they are denied access to the healthcare system, to the heat protection systems that the Saudis built. So I want to finalize, therefore, with this appeal of faith-based organizations to work with all national and subnational organizations to strengthen these kind of actions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pak Michiel. Thank you for sharing with us some response for concern. But I think when you mentioned that last year we have passed the 1.5 degree target, climate stabilization, that's quite a concern. But I hope we maintain the positive vibes. I'm sure there will be, you guys stay positive. We will tackle these, including using some approach from a religious approach. If I may, thank you for sharing some of the very implications of the climate change. Pak Michiel showed the heat stroke for Hajj pilgrimage can be 10 times higher at 2-degree climate scenarios and a number of other impacts. It's great that also you brought up the issues of inequality, which is important in terms of understanding our ability and coping capacity to damages given the absence or given the presence of inequality. There are a number of things here, but I like when you mentioned that we need money. At least we say that we need money. Money is not there. We hope to have 50-50 for climate adaptation mitigation. It turns out it's still very little for adaptation. Thank you for sharing the role of private sector. I hope private sector also join in supporting research at university, including at UIII, and a set of initiative and supporting climate actions, including for religious activity related, what in the climate negotiation we call it climate response measures. Now we would like to continue to the next keynote's speech, but I like to recognize here Pak Dekan of Faculty of Social Science are joining with us, Pak Phillips. I saw Pak Didin also, Pak Didin Syafruddin of PPIM, Pak. And also colleagues here, Pak Ridwan, Pak Tesri, of course, who has successfully helped organize this great conference. Pak, please, the floor is yours.
Dear participants, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and students, it is a pleasure and an honor for me to present some ideas on religious environmentalism and public policy. And I thank the organizers for inviting me. And I thank Bu Anna and Michiel for preparing the ground. Bu Anna spoke about ethics, how people should behave towards environment. Michiel spoke about the urgency, why we should do that. I limit myself to empirical knowledge about it. How do people react to environmental issues in fact? And what are the policy implications of that? For the religious environmentalism part, I will depend on two recent studies. One is the REACT study, Religious Environmental Actions in Action. It was already introduced Wednesday by PPIM, conducted by PPIM in Jakarta, UI in Jakarta. And the other study is the Han study, Humans and Nature study that was conducted by a team at ICRS, CRCS, UGM, Yogyakarta. Basically, more or less the same large-scale survey on how people behave or what's people's attitudes towards environmental studies. Both studies are related. I will also show the relationship between them, and I will compare the findings. So I will just talk about the REACT study. I refer to the Jakarta study, and the Han study, Humans and Nature, the one conducted by ICRS, CRCS, based on a validated scale of statements about human-nature interaction that people can agree with in different degrees. And for policy making, I depend on a discursive approach. Those of you who know me, I'm very much in discourse analysis. So multiplicity of meanings, do we all see the same challenges and how we can manage those meanings? What I will do, first I will speak about the ambivalence of religion, maybe some funny questions. How religious are Indonesians? That's a question. Do religious values shape environmental ethics? And do religious individuals have more concern for the environment than non-religious individuals? So I base myself on the findings of REACT and Han. And secondly, what are the implications for policy making? There is a multiplicity of meanings, at least that is what studies show. We ourselves are multi-voiced. That explains the many contradictions in our findings and ambiguities. And what I see is the need of forming discourse coalitions. The ambivalence of religion. Now, the REACT researchers start from the assumption that Indonesians are overwhelmingly religious and that religious values play a role in environmental ethics. Now, the question is that so? I look at this picture, I made it myself in Pasuruan when doing fieldwork there. I assume that the girl is a Muslim, I mean, the way she wears. And she makes this picture. I ask myself, what is the relation between her being a Muslim and the background? Is he embarrassed? Is he angry? Is he just interested? Why would you make a picture like this? So I try to understand what is in the person's mind, the religious mind, and what is the reality that Michael spoke about, the physical reality that we see here. Now, with regard to the first assumption, the REACT study shows clearly religion is very difficult to measure. We find in empirical studies many ambiguities and complexities, and that is very clear in the REACT study. So religion is difficult to measure. And when we talk about the value of religion in environmentalism, the REACT study clearly shows religion has a double role. It is on one hand religion-friendly, and on the other hand it is not religion-friendly. Now let us go a little bit deeper into this complexity, and once again I base myself on the two studies. Dilemma, beautiful title, Dilemma Environmentalism. All of us who are engaged in religious studies know the dilemmas, many dilemmas. Yesterday we spoke about mining. We see all the dilemmas there. And the other study is the Han study, Human-Nature Relationships. It is a study conducted in 2003, also large-scale survey conducted by the team at Gajah Mada University. And the results will be published this month, we hope, or next month in the Journal of Empirical Theology. So one of the indicators that the REACT study uses is whether or not people take religious values into account in decision making. The question is this a good indicator? Even if I would not be religious in Indonesia, I take religious values into account. I cannot not take religious values into account. That is very difficult in Indonesia. The same with, we did the same. The questions were the same in both researches. Going to a mosque or going to a church. I mean, what does it say about religion? In Indonesia, going to a mosque is a social obligation. It says very little, I think, about our personal beliefs. Now, the interesting thing in the REACT study is that it distinguishes Indonesians who take religious values into account and Indonesians who do not. That is funny, if you assume Indonesians are overwhelmingly religious, you assume that they take religion into account, but seemingly that is not completely the case. So the REACT study distinguishes Indonesians who never, seldom, quite often, always, or very often take religion into account in decision making. Unfortunately, the REACT study does not give the proportion of the groups. We did, and we found that in our study, less than half of the Muslims strongly agree with the statement, my religion plays an important role for decision making in my life. 38% does, yes, it plays a role in my life. But once again, what does it say? Because in Indonesia, religion values will always play a role whether you are religious or not, in schooling or marriage or whatever. The REACT study also makes a distinction between individual and communal religion, conservative and non-conservative. I don't go into that because then I also enter into state politics, about religious moderation and iman versus agama, so I don't deal in that. But it is interesting that you make that type of distinctions. My second question, do religious values shape environmental ethics? Now, interestingly, in the REACT study, the researchers say, I quote, although the Indonesian population is often viewed as a religious society, the theocentric position has actually the smallest proportion. End of quote. A very interesting statement. I show the statistics later. The REACT study is also partly based on the Hans study. The questions are related. You distinguish between theocentric, anthropocentric, and ecocentric attitudes. Basically, the difference is that the Hans study looks at humans, how humans see themselves in relation to nature. 4 models. The humans as master of nature, I can exploit nature. The humans as steward of nature, I have to care for nature. The human as a partner of nature, human equal, and we partner, and the humans as participants in nature. REACT study has a different classification. It looks at primarily at nature. Anthropocentric, nature is there for us. We can exploit nature. Ecocentric, nature should be preserved because it has a value in itself. And the theocentric vision, nature should be cared for because it is God's creation. And the REACT study says it is only in this third model, theoretical model, that religion plays a role. Now, interestingly, that is the least model that is adhered to. Most Indonesians adhere to the anthropocentric model. We found exactly more or less the same thing. In our research, we have 2 stewardships models. That means people have a high ethic for they care for nature. Interestingly, we find 2 varieties of this. One with statements on God. It is God's command that we have to do that, and one without. We call it the humanistic stewardship. Funny enough, against our expectation, that latter one, the humanistic one, scores higher than the religious one. And of course, we were puzzled. We have long debates. How can we explain that finding? But yeah, that is what the statistics tell us. So, yeah, the question is, do religious values shape environmental ethics, and in what way do they do that? Two studies seem to suggest that, yes, religion plays a role in one way or another, but yeah, not primarily. Of course, we try to explain, and later on for policy making, that will an important insight. Third, do religious values shape environmental ethics more than non-religious values? Again, I quote the REACT study: religious and non-religious individuals, by the way, also a very strange distinction if you assume that Indonesians are overwhelmingly religious, but okay, that is what is in the report, seem to have the same level of concern. End of quote. There are differences, there are slight differences, we find exactly the same in our research, but most of them are not very significant, at least not statistically significant. So, yeah, the conclusion, and that is always with empirical research, is quite ambiguous, quite paradoxical. The REACT study concludes religion has a dual role. Sometimes it is environmental friendly, sometimes it is not. In our Hans study, we have a different conclusion. We conclude that in environmentalism there are two layers. One is a fundamental layer, and one is a constructed layer. The fundamental layer is simply very simple. We react to nature as human beings. Not because you are Indonesian, not because you are Muslim or Catholic or atheist, but because you are human beings. However, that fundamental layer may be constructed in languages that are available to us. And if you are religious, of course, you frame that language in a religious language. If you're not so religious, you will do it in a different way. So we see two layers in the environmentalism action. And of course, we will come back to that later. Okay, sorry, I should have shown this slide, but basically this is what I said. Here you see the table in the REACT study. You see the proportion of the theocentric, anthropocentric, and ecocentric view. This is the table from our study. Interestingly, you see the pattern, all the religions is the same. The first is the religious steward, I spoke about it. The second is the humanistic steward. The third is the religious master, and the fourth is the religious participant. Now, the pattern in all the religions is more or less the same. That is the good news. We always talk about differences between religions, but if you look at this finding, the differences are not that big. The highest support in all the religions is for the humanistic stewardship. There is very little support for the master ID, unlike Lynn White always said that we exploit nature and so on. People are not very supportive for the master model, and we see that the participant model in some of the relations is negative. Good, I leave it at that for the religious environmentalism. Oh, now it goes wrong. Yeah, what are the implications for policy making? I move to my second part. The REACT study concludes, I quote, "It is important to integrate religion into environmental policies." Now, from the perspective of public policy making, I try to be a bit provocative. Why is that so? Why should we include religion? I give some of the conclusions. Religion has a dual role. So why should I engage with an ambiguous reality if I am a policymaker? Second, the role of religious leaders and religious organizations is not significant. I mean, the influence of peers and social media is much higher than religious leaders, according to the REACT study. And the differences between people who take religious values into account and people who don't is not that big. So, yeah, I mean, we have to ask the question, why should we take religion into account? Yeah? So what is the reason? Okay, let me perspective. The REACT study says that we must socialize. We must socialize people because 80%, I think, 80% of Muslims have no idea about green Islam or environmentalism. Just is not an issue. So we must socialize the people. My fear is that there is a pitfall here, namely of a realist understanding of what is the environmental problem. Is there a problem? For whom is it a problem? Why is it a problem? Of course, Michiel shows as scientists that we have a problem. But do the people in the street have a problem? That is a question that we have to ask ourselves. And based on the statistics, maybe not. So we look at this as if there is a problem, but we forget that we construct it as a problem from a certain normative perspective. And that is what we should take into account into policy making. We don't lack information. Socialization, give more information, more information. We have an overload of information. But the problem is that we interpret information from quite different perspectives and interests. Now, if I'm a health officer, I'm concerned about plastic waste. But if I'm a garbage picker, for example, garbage is not a problem. It is my source of income, and for a scientist, it is interesting. So we have quite different understandings of the reality that we look at. If I look at the REACT study, people are not so much concerned about the health. There is another study by Purpose, published last year. People are concerned with health, criminality, corruption, income, unemployment. That is the concern of the people. So if I read about climate change, I interpret it from that perspective. I'm concerned about my income. I'm concerned about my health. We look at the reality from quite different perspectives, and I think in policy making we have to take that into account. Thus, ecological problems are not problems by themselves, that is my statement, but they are constructed, interpreted as problems. And of course, for a scientist or a political scientist, it is quite different than from a garbage picker or a religious leader. I interviewed many religious leaders, and many of them said, yeah, that's not my business, I did a study in Chitaram River concerning about the pollution there. And then the guy said, yeah, well, that's not my business, that's the government. Or I did a study in Pasuruan on plastic. And the guy said, yeah, that's not my business, that is the government. So, that's what I stress. We construct realities as a problem. Secondly, the multi-voice itself. There are not only positions in the society, but there are also positions in myself. Everybody of us, we are scientists, we are father, we are mother, we are believer or not believer, we are a football player or whatever we are. So we have a variety of competing voices in ourselves. That also explains why, for example, in your study, an intellectual Muslim says, no, I favor green Islam. But at the same time, the same person says, no, but we must do mining, and that seems to be a contradiction. And we saw it yesterday. But from the perspective of the dialogical self, it is quite understanding. When I say that we have to go for green Islam, that is my voice as a Muslim. When we talk about mining, that is my economic voice. And in your study, it is quite clear that the economic voice in financial incentives are dominant. And I think we have to take that into account. So from the perspective of the dialogical self, here we deal with a multiplicity of voices, and the religious voice may be there, maybe it is suppressed, or it speaks to us. Now, what does it mean for policy making? From my perspective, for policy making, it means that we have to form discourse coalitions, bringing together, taking into account the multiplicity of meanings and management of meanings. The REACT study clearly shows that people are driven by economic motives. behaviors that Muslims often practice are behaviors that do not require cost. Behaviors that are least practiced are behaviors that require cost. I mean, it's quite natural, it's quite understandable. Yeah? People are willing to change their behavior if there are financial incentives. Now, governments have numerous instruments to regulate markets by putting higher taxes on plastic, for example, or products that harm nature, and lower taxes on nature-friendly products. Moreover, something that you do not talk about is lawmaking. Simply lawmaking, as we see in Bali, a governor who says, no, we don't want plastic. So it is the economic incentive, it is law, and religion might play a role there. So what I'm arguing for is that religion in itself, in my view, can do little. That is what both studies show. But if there is a coalition, and maybe that is what Michael meant and Anna, so when we have various agencies working together, and religion also can strengthen and be strengthened by lawmaking, financial incentives, market orientation, and so on, maybe we can make a step further. And the good news, I think, of both the REACT study and the Han study is that there is a common ground for a common action, because basically the differences between us, religious or not religious, Muslim or Catholic or whatever, is not that big. Okay, coming to a conclusion. I find this a very telling title, Green Islam Setengah Hati, half-hearted, and that is exactly very well expressed the reality that we have faced as scholars of religion. There is no robust evidence that there is a positive correlation between religious values and environmentalism. On certain aspects, yes. For example, there is empirical evidence that belief in afterlife has a positive, and so on. So if you look at very selected cases, you will find a positive correlation, but overall, there is not. Of course, if we go to case studies, and we have hundreds of case studies in activism movements and so on, of course you will find a positive correlation. But overall, we don't have quite robust evidence for that. And so I think this is a very pointed title, and I think we have to take serious this reality in our policy making. And I start with this ambiguity, referring to my research in Pasuruan. These two pictures are taken in the same pesantren. Agama dibangun di atas. Religion is built on cleanliness, and the same pesantren produces air mineral and distributed in plastic bottles, whereas NU has a fatwa that plastic is makruh. So, to conclude, not as scholars of religion, but as religious people, practice what you preach. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Frans, for bringing some empirics to the opposing voice about religious values. So, Frans divide the presentations into one on ambivalence of religion and then the implication. The other one is on the implication for policy making. It is of interest to me personally because of the MPP in climate change. This finding seems to be giving us headache because of the multiplicity of different sorts. Thank you for acknowledging that religion is difficult to measure. I always wonder to those colleague researchers intending to measure religion, so good luck. But what we can also learn here is I think the 3 points are very critical here: the multiplicity of meanings, multi-voice of self, and then the coalitions of discourse or meaning. I personally think that the findings very interesting. but I wonder whether what happened when, say, the case is not the, for example, waste, but the case is what Michiel mentioned about Hajj pilgrimage, how religious religious people see cases like pilgrimage. But this is something we can say for later discussion. But at least we can see, thank you for the organizers, very nice representation of the keynote speeches. We would like to move to the second keynote, and this is will be delivered through a recording, yeah, Pak Tesri, and I hope it's ready for. So the next presentation by Iyad Abumoghli from UNEP. It's on? Yeah. Okay, so just it's one way.
Distinguished delegates, esteemed faith leaders, colleagues, and friends, it is an honor to address you today on a matter that transcends politics, economics, and even environmental science. A matter that speaks directly to the heart and soul of our collective humanity, the role of religion in environmental governance. We are gathered here at a time of unprecedented planetary crises. Climate change, ecosystem degradation, biodiversity loss, pollution, and even pandemic threats are no longer distant warnings. They are present realities. And while science and policy frameworks offer critical tools, they are not enough. We must reach deeper into the ethical, moral, and spiritual dimensions that guide human behavior. The Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, EBBIS, has reported that 3/4 of land-based environment and 66% of the marine environment have been altered by human activity. We face the extinction of 1 million species. Air pollution kills millions annually, and climate change left unchecked threatens the very basis of human civilization. This is not merely a scientific or technical issue. It is a moral crisis, one rooted in our relationship with nature and with one another. As UNEP's Faith for Earth's coalition puts it, and has emphasized, unsustainable consumption and production patterns are not only environmental issues, they are deeply ethical ones. But why religion matters? Let us consider some compelling statistics. 84% of the world's population identifies with a religion. Faith-based organizations own 8% of habitable land, run half of the world's schools, and controls substantial financial investments, making them the 4th largest economic power on earth. Religious teachings, whether from Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, or even indigenous traditions, offer rich traditions of environmental stewardship. From the Quranic concept of Khalifa stewardship, to the Buddhist interdependence of all life, to indigenous cosmologies that see nature as sacred kin, spiritual traditions provide the values and narratives necessary to reframe our relationship with the earth. In addition, we need to consider another power, the power of beyond formal law, the power of moral norms. We must recognize the limits of formal environmental law. Formal governance systems, laws, treaties, regulations are necessary for sure, but not sufficient. This is where the concept of beyond formal law becomes critical. It invites us to include the non-state normative, customary, and faith-driven approaches in shaping environmental behavior. In many communities, especially in the global south, religious authority and customary practices wield more day-to-day influence than formal law. Faith actors reach hearts where law ceramics, sustainable water systems, and green architecture, turning places of worship into models of sustainable living. Second, faith-informed policy advocacy. Faith leaders can influence public discourse and policy. Their moral authority can challenge extractive economies and promote climate justice, especially in defending the rights of the poor, women, youth, and indigenous peoples. Third, ethical investment. Religious financial institutions must lead in divesting from fossil fuel and investing in nature-positive enterprises. The post-COVID recovery is a unique opportunity to reorient towards ethical, planet-friendly economic models as we have seen in the past few years. Interfaith collaboration, which is supported by Faith for Earth Coalition and other interfaith bodies, and our Sacred Commitment Declaration are examples of how faiths can unite to speak with one moral voice across religious lines, contributing to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. And fifth, religious education and formation, embedding ecological values in religious education systems, whether madrasas, seminaries, or Sunday schools, ensures that the next generation grows up seeing care for the earth as a spiritual duty. Therefore, we must move toward a collective environmental ethic, one rooted not in homogenizing belief systems, but in shared moral responsibility. This is the ethic can, first, reinforce the human rights of the poor and vulnerable, disproportionately affected by environmental degradation. Second, align national development strategies with ecological limits and spiritual values, and guide global institutions, including the UN, to formally recognize the ethical and spiritual dimensions of sustainability. As I mentioned, we have seen during the COVID-19 pandemic, and we understood that the need for, we need a systemic thinking and systemic change, where health, nature, equity, and governance are interlinked. The spiritual voices must not be brought to the center of multilateral decisions making only, but also to everyday's life. But to institutionalize the role of religion in environmental governance, I propose the following. First, governments should formally engage religious leaders in environmental policy, consultations, and implementation plans. Second, intergovernmental bodies must adopt frameworks that include ethics and spiritual values in environmental agreements. Third, faith actors must build capacity in environmental science and policy to better inform their advocacy and programs. And fourth, partnerships between scientists and theologians must be deepened to articulate practical, value-based responses to environmental challenges. The Faith for Earth Coalition has played a pivotal role in mobilizing and amplifying the voices of faith leaders at various UN climate change, biodiversity, and land degradation conferences, the known as COPs, recognizing their unique capacity to bridge moral authority, community mobilization, and environmental stewardship. Through the organization of high-level faith leader summits and establishment of dedicated faith pavilions, beginning with COP26, but continuing until COP29, and expanding the scope and impact in the subsequent COPs, the coalition has brought together hundreds of faith actors from diverse traditions and regions. These inclusive spaces have served not only a platform for interfaith dialogue, but also as forums for advocacy, where spiritual leaders and communities have collectively addressed contemporary environmental challenges rooted in the ethical teachings of their faiths. Discussions have focused on the urgent need for systemic change, raising the climate and environmental crises beyond science and policy to a deeper moral and spiritual crisis, a crisis of ethics, values, and responsibility towards the earth and future generations. By grounding environmental actions in moral imperatives, the coalition have contributed to shaping a moral holistic narrative for climate justice and sustainable transformation at the heart of global climate negotiations. The earth is not just a resource, it is a sacred trust, a man, a gift, a temple. Protecting it is not just a legal duty, it is a spiritual obligation. As people of faith and conscience, we must act now not only because we can, but because we must. We need to build a new model of environmental governance, one that is inclusive, ethical, and inspired, one that does not simply regulate behavior, but transforms hearts, one where religion does not sit at the margins of environmental discourse, but stands at its moral core. Documents such as Radboud by Pope Francis and Wijsen, A Covenant for the Earth, represent transformative, systemic-level contributions to environmental governance by grounding ecological responsibility in deeply rooted theological, ethical, and moral frameworks. Radboud articulates an integral ecology that connects care for the environment with social justice, economic equity, and spiritual well-being, calling for a cultural revolution that redefines humanity's relationship with nature, rooted in compassion and responsibility. Similarly, Al-Mizan, developed through the leadership of UNEP's Faith for Earth and global Islamic scholars, offers a comprehensive Islamic ecological ethics that highlights balance, Al-Mizan, stewardship, Khalifa, and justice, Adil, as guiding principles for sustainable living. Both texts go beyond symbolic declarations. They institutionalize religious engagement in environmental action, offering faith-consistent policy frameworks, practical guidance, and theological legitimacy for systemic change. By doing so, they help bridge the gap between global environmental governance and the lived beliefs and practices of billions, embedding sustainability within moral and spiritual worldviews and catalyzing faith-based contributions to the national and multilateral environmental strategies. Ladies and gentlemen, to achieve truly sustainable and ethical environmental governance, we must strategically integrate the moral authority, community reach, and value-driven frameworks of religions, transforming faith into a powerful force for environmental action and systemic change. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Iyad Abumoghli, for delivering his keynote through recording. You mentioned, started with the so-called at the UN semantics, like a triple crisis, the IPBES, the biodiversity, the climate, and the environment, which becomes a pretext for what he called a moral crisis. I think we like the idea with the collective environmental ethics, whether it's a new term or is it something to do with what Ibu Ana has been working so far. We can discuss about that. And Pa Iyad mentioned a number of sort of action connecting religious group or interfaith groups with environment or climate. And he mentioned it started at COP26 in Glasgow, and there are a number of things that he mentioned here. We can remember aligning national development with religious values, up to science and religious and religion relations. Now I would like to move to the last but not the least. Ibu Iim will be delivering the speech.
So maybe slightly different with Bu Anna and Pak Michiel, but maybe slightly closer to Pak Frans. So my presentation today will be on behavioral and empirical aspects of our study. But before that, I would like to give advertisement. So in our project, we already produced 3 books. You can scan it here, and the book is free. You could download it online in our website. So if you haven't really checked and read our book, you can access it here. And what Frans already explained before is it's also part of the book. And my presentation is also a small part of the book, but I would like to see something slightly different from the book and from this book, but still part of this big project from the survey that we held in 2 years ago. So in responding yesterday conversations with our religious leaders from Hindu, from Muslim, from Catholic, from Christians, and also some of the speaker also mentions here about that climate change, no identity, we need a collective environmental ethic, we need interfaith collaboration. So my presentation today will look at to the issues of religion, interfaith environmentalism in the context of Indonesia. So my question will be whether it's religion or it's interaction. Okay. And as I said before, that the environment, of course, Frans said it depends on who framed it as the problem, but we can say that the environment is the problem for humankind, regardless of their beliefs, regardless of their religion. Disaster do not recognize, whether you are Muslim, so the disaster will come to you. Or you Catholic, Christian, I think we can experience disaster the same, regardless of our religions. And considering this, we could see in the context of Indonesia, we see some movement, interfaith, environmentalism is also in the rise in Indonesia. Here is one of the activists who works on that. The example is Iko Bhinneka Muhammadiyah, who works on, and Green Faith Indonesia, who works on how different religious community works together in the issues of environment. Or we have IRI, Interfaith Rainforest in Indonesia, is also part of the interfaith movement on Indonesian community or activists on the issues of environment. But then when we look at the literatures, maybe actually the word interreligious or interfaith is already long there ago. But in the context of environment, the word of interfaith environmentalism itself is still quite new. There's still limited study on this case. And among those available study, we could see that the first one is looking at more on the prospects and the potentials of the interfaith environmentalism, whether it can help bridge religious differences, promoting interfaith cooperation in the issues of environment, also encouraging interfaith goodwill and reducing interfaith tensions. That's some of the study focusing on the prospects and potential. And also some study looking at more on case study, looking at on the practice and the movement. Like some study focus on Iko Bhinneka, how this movement works, or also in the context of a minority group, there is also a study on looking at the activities of Clean the City, how the Ahmadiyya community as minority group try to engage with different religious group as a part of interfaith actions in the context of environment, and also in the context of non-Indonesia, some also study focus on certain groups or alliance networks such as Pan-Asia Interfaith Climate Network, or in the context of US, there's a Virginia Interfaith power and light, how they encourage interfaith collaboration between the individuals there to work on the issues of energy. So what is the missing part? The missing part is most of this study focus on interfaith collaboration and the public, most of the study focus more on the context of religious figures. Yesterday we have Romo Budi Purnomo proposed the term interreligious eco-theological leaders, right? So he emphasized on leaders, even though he mentioned that leaders could be also in grassroots level. Like IRI, I think is more focused on the religious figures in Indonesia. So how about the interfaith environmentalism at the public levels? So I think that's the missing gap, and my study, or our study, will focus on how the interfaith environmentalism at the public level, especially examining the public attitude and behaviors related to interfaith environmentalism. So based on this, this is my research questions for this presentations. Does religions or social interactions affect public engagement in interfaith environmentalism? Okay. And I think you're already familiar with this theory, the contact theory, but the emphasis will be intergroup contact theories, how the interaction between different group of people will strengthen the mutual trust, strengthen the possibility of collaboration, and etc. So I use this as a framework. And then in terms of data, as I mentioned before, the data for my presentation based on our survey on REACT program, and it's a nationally representative survey cover not only Muslim but also other religious groups in Indonesia, including the local beliefs as well, even though they are small proportions. This is the coverage of our survey, and this is also some technical statistical testing to show that our methodology fits with nationally representative of population in Indonesia. Okay, now a little bit move with the context of Indonesia. I think we often heard that Indonesia is very diverse, ethnically and religiously, right? We have many religious groups in Indonesia. Even within one religion, we also have very diverse group within one religion. But my question is Indonesia really religiously diverse? So I use this data from national census in 2010. And you could see here, the darker means the fractionalized, this is measuring fractionalization of religious fractionalization index. So the darker means the fractionalized, I mean more diverse. But the lighter mean more homogeneous. So you could see here that actually, even though nationally we could say that Indonesia is very diverse religiously, but if you zoom into a small part of Indonesia, actually you could see that many parts of Indonesia tend to be more homogeneous in terms of religions. Only some part of the Indonesia, especially the east part, they tend to be more fractionalized. I mean more diversity in religious group affiliations. Because it's data in 2010, so I want to make sure in the recent data, unfortunately I couldn't have the district level, only provincial level, but you could see also the same pattern based on the data on 2023. Shows that yes, some part of Indonesia is diverse religiously, especially in eastern part of Indonesia, but some other part, especially like Java, mostly are homogeneous in terms of religions. Okay. Now move on into our survey. We asked the respondent whether they agree or disagree that religious differences hinder environmental collaborations. It's asking about interfaith environmentalism that I mentioned before. So normatively, Indonesians do not agree that religious difference hinder them to collaborate. It means that actually they are willing to collaborate with people of any religion in the context of environment. So it's confirming that, yeah, environment is everyone's problem, no matter their religions. Indonesians also agree about this, because it's a large proportion, like more than 70, or almost 80, yeah, more than 70% agree, or disagree that religious differences hinders environmental collaborations. But then how in the context of the reality? So we also asking them how often, the frequencies, how often they collaborate with other people from different religion in the context of environment, and how often the opportunity they have to collaborate in the context of environment with other people of different religions. So even though normatively they said, yeah, we agree, but socially, sociologically speaking, we could see here that those who mentioned never is 39%, almost 40%. They never have a chance to collaborate or work together with people from different religions. And 31.71% said rarely and seldom. And in terms of having the opportunity, also showing the same pattern, that more majority of Indonesians have lack opportunity. There's no opportunity for them. And we could see from the figure before in the map, it shows maybe the opportunity is not there, because my society tends to be homogeneous. It's not really diverse. And it's also confirmed with our questions on how many friends with different religion they have. You could see here only 31.94%. They said none, they don't have any friends from different religions. And 37 of them said, yeah, I have but few. But those who have many and some is quite small proportion compared to those who do not have or only a few friends of different religions. So it's statistically a descriptive statistic of the finding, but I also want to show you in terms of the causal analysis. So I included two different models here. The first models, I include all religious variables, although Frans mentioned that it's difficult to measure religion, but I'll try to measure religion based on the literature. Of course, there is still limitations in measuring religion, but yeah, I use this several variables in measuring religions. And once I only include religious variables, there are some variables of religion that have a significant associations with people's frequencies in collaborating with people from interfaith background. Such as here, those who, in terms of religiosity, they tend to have more, those who have often practicing their religion in terms of ritual, they tend to have more frequency in collaborating with people of different religion in terms of environment. But those who consider themselves as, I'm religious, self-reported religiosity, I'm religious, those who tend to consider themselves as more religious, they tend to have less frequency of having interfaith collaboration in the environmental issues. But, and also I asking about what is the causes of climate change? When they said that it's not God, but it's economic activities and human lifestyle, they tend to have more frequency in having interaction or collaboration with other people from different religion in the context of environment. But that's when I only include all religious variables. Once in the second model, when I also include some, I said maybe sociological or what I called before as a social interaction, when I include the variable of friends of other religions, the effects of religion disappear. Only one is consistent. Those who have a higher level of religious conservatisms tend to have a lower level of frequency in having interaction or collaboration with people of different faith in terms of environments. The rest disappear. So it indicates that, no matter, I want to highlight here also. In the first model, I also measured or examining the religious affiliations. Here, in the finding source, compared to those who have other religion, Muslim, or those who are affiliated as Islam, they tend to have less frequency in having collaboration with people of other religions. But in the second model, when I include the variable of having friend of interreligious faith, the effect has disappeared. It indicates that no matter the religions, no matter your religion are, as long as you have a friend of different religion, you might have the opportunity to have interactions and have a collaboration with people of other religions in the context of environment. So that's what I want to highlight here, that yes, religion have effect, but then when we include the sociological aspects, social contact perspective, the effect seems disappears. And the second part, I want to show you the socio-demographic aspect. This one is more on, I want to highlight the effect of educations here, because the finding shows the higher the level of your educations, the higher the frequency you will have the interaction or collaboration with people of different religion in the context of environment. It indicates that education can be an open space for everyone who previously maybe from more homogeneous society in their hometown, but once they get education, education can give you the opportunity to interact with the people with different background and different class, including different religion. So the higher the level of your education, the probability you will have interaction with people with different religion is getting higher. Okay. And this one is, the first one I include all the religions. The second part, I only analyzed Muslim, and the finding quite similar. The differences is only in the context of religious affiliation. So here I differentiate between those who are affiliated with Muhammadiyah, those affiliated with Nahdlatul Ulama, do not affiliate with any other religious affiliations, or affiliate with other religion. And when I only include religious variables in terms of religious affiliations here, those who consider themselves affiliate with Muhammadiyah, not only organizationally, but like culturally Muhammadiyah, they tend to have a higher level of collaboration with people of different religions in terms of environment. I think because it makes sense, because Muhammadiyah has a lot of programs on environment, and I think encourage also activities with different group and different religions. But then, when I include, again, friends of other religions, the effects disappears. So what does it mean? Again, no matter your religious affiliation, once you have friends of different religions, the probability or the frequency you have a collaboration with them is getting higher. So again, it's social interactions become very important. The effect of education also consistent here. Yeah, the effect of education is also consistent here. Okay, so to sum up, I don't know why the slide is only shows the half part. Okay, but I think in my presentations, I would like to maybe argue or introduce two terms. The new term that we know, that interfaith environmentalism, but in my presentation, I think we need to also distinguish that interfaith environmentalism could be in the level of elite, like religious figures, religious leaders, but also in the public interfaith environmentalism, where people individually interact each other with people of different groups. So that's, I think, what I propose in my presentations. Second, as I mentioned, religion and religiosity do not simply play important roles once in influencing public interfaith environmentalism, especially when we include how the effects, how the social interaction play quite significant role in influencing your engagement with interfaith environmentalism. And the last one, that's almost the last one, I don't know why it's disappeared. Educations, particularly, as I mentioned, higher education is play important roles, and it can garner organic social interactions and increase the possibility of having public interfaith environmentalism. Actually, yesterday I attended Bu Johanna's presentations. In her presentation, it's so interesting, and I think it could be the example of how public interfaith environmentalism play a role in the society. Bu Johanna's study looking at how the organic farmer from from Catholic and from Muslim farmers, and how they do like interfaith dialogue on organic farming, but it's also strengthening their social relation and religious relation without talking about religion directly. So this is what the example of what I said as public interfaith environmentalism in more grassroots, in more individual and local context, rather than only in religious figures or in terms of alliances, network, but in more daily life, social life of the people, grassroots in Indonesia. So the last one is maybe like a kind of recommendation. I think it's important because of the social conditions that I showed you before. It's important to expanding spaces for interfaith encounters, like what Bu Johanna's find in her study, and cooperation in responding to environmental issue, because it's not only responding to issues of environment, but at the same time maybe also strengthening tolerance among religious groups in Indonesia, rather than talking about the theological aspect, the differences between theology, between religion. Maybe we can come into the issues of interfaith using the issues of environment, like organic farming. It's more neutral. Everyone can accept that rather than talking the differences. Okay, that's some of my presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Buim. So, we've seen how first of all, congratulations for the many publications of PPIM under the REACT project. It's a good value of money. I hope there is still the Dutch embassy here in the room. Yes? The second round of funding or third round, please, you can continue because it's the value of the money. Anyway, so departing from so-called intra-group theories, which is, I also learned something from these. She mentioned and she presented some empirics, some findings. Interesting that mostly, a large proportion, mostly or never, or rarely collaborate with different religion. And the more conservative, I think the likelihood of cooperation is lower, and that's statistically significant. To use the terms of Michiel, is a reason for concern, or reason of concern. Yeah. And also, but I think that's a good news that but this is more on the sociological explanation. When there are friends of other religion, then the likelihood increase. But at least we can see some differences between the empirical findings of Ibu Im and Frans. And that's important and nice to have the differences. Now we'll move to question and answers, but before that, please give a round of applause to all the keynote speech, including Iyad, connecting us through the recording. Now we'll move to Q&A, and okay, I see raising hands. We collect first 3, And please, if it is question. So should we start from, no, the second row? Yes. We collect 3 and the very, okay. Guys, are you okay if we give the opportunity to ladies first? Yeah, so the 3 here. One. Excuse me. Yeah. So you will be the first. You will be the second. And could you raise your hand? No, we collect 3 first. Yes. With the one with the blue sharp. Yes. So 3, and then the second round will be for Kali. So no worries. Please. Please mention your name and your institutional attribution. Thank you.
Thank you. Good day, Prof. Anna, Prof. Michiel, Prof. Frans, and Prof. IM. My name is Nurma from Paramadina University. I hope I can talk this topic that I almost never find in an Islamic environmental issue, because this topic I think less sexy than mining, which is the idea to reduce or not to eat meat, or you can call it practice as vegetarian, veganism, and also plant-based diet. So why am I interested in this topic is that because when we, talk about deforestation, I find the data that within the 45 until 65% of deforestations, the cause of that because the purpose of agriculture. And those agriculture, the first data from the WRI is for industrial farming, cattle, livestock, animals, and something like that. So first question I want to ask Prof. Ann, which is what is the proper way to addressing this topic? Because I think when you're trying to approaching in more like theological, in Quran, Al-Araf 31, God has said that eat and drink halal, but do not excessive. Even in Hadith, Sayyidina Umar say that beware of meat, because it has an addictions like the addictions of wine. And you can see that as my study in Buddhism, they practicing vegetarianism because it's a control of lust, right? And then in Islamic government or in Islamic context, food doesn't seem interested with them. And my second question, which is for Professor Michiel, Professor Frans, and Professor IM, which is you can answer this question on empirical approach. You see that, or an economical approach, you see that in 2024, the plant-based industry is worth 8.1 billion. Even in 2050, net worth was like 1.4 trillion billion. But this thing, although it become like you have this data, but this thing doesn't seem attract the government. So my question is it because of religious issue or rational issue? Thank you.
Thank you. We record the second. Sorry, yes, second.
Okay. Thank you so much. My name is Aninda. I'm an independent scholar, but I was in IC Singapore for about 5 years. I have 2 questions, moderator. One question is to Prof. Anna and Prof. Michiel. It's about, because you're talking much about future, so I was just curious about imagining futures. So my question is that, would it be helpful and more productive if we talk about future in a triggering way, like a fear-mongering, talking about the damage that will happen in the future, or would it be helpful if we say something about hopeful, hopeful tone, or something that is nice that's going to be happening in the future although I don't know whether there will be nice things happen in the future, but yeah, in your experiences and thinking about ethics and also your engagement with political leaders, how do we approach this? Because I know so many of us here thinking about how do we talk to people? Do we start with a question about something that is bad or good? That's my first question. The second question is to Professor Frans and Professor Iyim. Professor Iyim mentioned about no matter what religion, these people will actually talk about environment. My question is, how about the interaction, social interaction between religious people and non-religious people? So I was thinking here about the people who are influenced by ideologies. So for example, religious people, in my findings, some of our research, found that religious people, they don't want to engage with people with, for example, using feminism, in feminist justice, because it's against, ideologically different from them. And those who are fighting for LGBTQ, because it is not religion, So how this social interaction will benefit the future? Because Prof. Iyim mentioned about is Muslim and non-Muslim and interfaith, but how about interpersonal or inter-ideology? Because if we want to strengthen collaboration, strengthen tolerance, increase awareness, then we have to make people, as many hands on the deck, right? We have to engage more people. We have to be more inclusive. But in this sense, we exclude those people who are believing in different ideologies.
Sure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. The third question, sorry, I have your point. The one with the blue, sorry. Yang duduk di depan padekan. Padekan, first. Did you raise your hand? No, you were raising your hand? No? No. I'm collecting for the... Oh, okay. You are raising your hand for the... Oh, very kind. No, then I'll take the another one. Sorry, I'll collect for the... Excuse me, yes, you are in front. Okay. Sorry.
It's okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Assalamualaikum. My name is Sheila. I am from the Faculty of Law, Universitas Islam Indonesia, so UII. As a person from a legal perspective, and also the speakers from the UNEP said that the law reaches the mind, values reaches the heart. And mau tidak mau, you like it or not, what we do now, the behavior that's shaping now, are the behavior shaped by the law, right? And I'm kind of, from a legal perspective, and also looking at our current governmental policies, like food estates, and also e-fee industries, and many other current policies created by the government, it's actually, from my perspective, it's hindering us to achieving the SDGs and also net zeros. As Prof. Hilson mentioned that actually if we do not take policies, our temperature will reach high. So I'm actually curious about the gap in the investment from the private sectors in adaptive effort, So my question is, how do we translate this return on investment, not just on the economic sense, but also to the loss of opportunities or the lack of, I mean, there is so many scholars that are already sharing the concept of, for example, donut economic or the triple dividend created by the WRI or any other efforts to measuring the profits. But all the investors, they only care about the economical profits. they don't see like investing in adaptive effort, creating a beneficial economic incentive. On the other side, our current government did not have any disincentive for the unethical behavior of the companies and industries. So what is your take in these current situations? We are facing in a very, our friends from the indigenous peoples are also facing injustice, and it's very hard for them to having justice for protecting their home and their forests. Although we have carbon credits and nilai ekonomi carbon, it does not translate into a just efforts by the government. So what is your take? I wanted to see from the perspective of maybe ethical and also scientific and also the grassroots effort, how do we move this positive efforts and initiative to the languages of the governments? So that is my questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we have 3 set of questions. I think Bu Anna would like to respond. You have a number of questions, but I think first from Nurla.
I can talk loud.
Yeah, quite loud. But
I usually do.
Be a little better. Okay. Thank you for those wonderful questions and for the privilege of going first. I'll try to keep things short. Bu Norma, you were talking to me, I think. Where are you? The first, yeah, there you are. Hi. You were asking you asked me what is the proper way to talk about food systems, and I'd like to reframe that a little bit because I don't know. I don't have a fatwa on that. What I can say are a couple of things. The first is that my own interest, and maybe this wasn't it wasn't foregrounded in the talk, but it might actually circle around to what I'm telepathically thinking Pat Soni's question is going to be too. But I'm interested in how religious ethics comes in when, in a sense, other systems fail. So my example was about the acknowledged limitations of the Euro-American tradition of philosophical ethics. It's kind of like halting problem. And then saying, well, what are we going to do now? You know, religious ethics is something that's productive in this space, I think, for everyone. And similarly, looking at other issues like talking about law, like, you know, fatwas, with the help of Fakhruddin Mangunjaya, thinking about why is it that people thought that there needed to be Muslim fatwas when there's already other forms of, you know, pretty good environmental law on the books. So what kind of gap is that filling? So that tends to be my interest in my normative-ish intervention when I have one. Then there's this other thing, which is the idea that there are resources within tradition that can be deployed, can be leveraged, can be instrumentalized in order to forward, you know, certain kinds of goals. And, you know, maybe that's what the question is about. And I think maybe the question is just simply like, what are some things about Islam that match up with goals that would be moving toward, you know, more just food systems, moving toward, you know, resources that are more plant-based, or even vegetarianism as a lifestyle choice. And yeah, you know, I could maybe help with that. You know, here's what I'd say right quick. The first thing is, if you want to look at, you know, Islamic tradition, animal rights is super interesting. It's a super interesting class of multi-species ethics, and it's how practical ethics kind of got started in environmental ethics with Peter Singer and others. And I think it's a special case also with the history of looking at animals as kind of a proxy for the human in tradition. So that's one way to go. Another is to look at justice, environmental futures, and sustainability, and just claim that that's a, you know, just like many people here have, that's a religious thing too. Although it doesn't have to be one. You could look at historical examples. It looks like we had a group of influential philosophers called the Ikhwan as-Safa who were vegetarian. And there's books on the history of vegetarian Muslims. I know of some in English. I'm sure there's in other languages too. Like I don't read, Turkish, for example. But you could look at that if you want to convince others that this is like, a normatively Islamic thing to do, which would be a choice to make. And then finally, there might be some problems. There are people who are really struggling with questions about green zabiha. And that's not a problem for everybody, but that is for someone, in which case that becomes an issue that people really want to address head on. So that's some stuff about that. Food systems are super, super important for environmental justice and sustainability. I think just in general, like hooking them into this SDG discourse is helpful, whether you do it on an Islamic or religious basis or not. And then Linda, I think, is the other question that's kind of like, for me, I can't really talk. Sheila, your question about what the government should do, I don't know, man. I'm working with my government as much as I can, Wish me luck. I go home in a couple days. I'm from the United States. Linda, though, I can work with this. So the question, again, it's kind of a normative question, and I think the question is about effective messaging. Assuming that we're all now on the same page of putting forward some kind of like motivational environmental message, right? And it's a question that was formed around affect. Should you scare people or not, right? And I see why that question would come around to me, because I was the one talking about ultimate judgment and the bad place. Not that long ago. I think that I'm going to back off of that, what's the best messaging? Because luckily I'm not actually in that business. That's a hard business. How to sell environmental action. A lot of people want religion to do that, and we've heard, about the limitations of that actually, working in ways that people expect. But I can say that the environment is a future concept. Right? So no matter what, you're going to need to give people a picture of the future. And I suppose that was what my presentation was about. You need one, right, somehow. And so, I think that that's good. I think, again, the language of sustainability is often deployed to give pictures of the future in terms of, achievable to-do lists, right? SDGs aren't an ethical discourse. It's a... Right? It's just some things. So it's not bad, right? But within that is this kind of sense of affective neutrality that I think people can find comfort in. Oh, it's okay. Maybe late stage capitalism is going to work after all. Maybe we can work with this, right? Maybe, right? Maybe. But at the same time, that sort of ignores what I would call the elephant in the room, to use an English idiom, which is that, it's not okay.
Thank you, Bu Ana. Thank you. I just reminded Bapak Testri, the time is up. That's a bad news. But if you are okay and all the speakers are okay, I collect the question and address it directly to the speakers, given the interest of time. Michel, you want to chip in on the plant-based things?
Yes. I mean...
So it turned into a talk show now. I'm so sorry about that. Please, Pa.
Actually, I first want to express my sympathies to Ibu Ana and all our friends in the US dealing with the current administration.
Don't bring the US thing. It will be another class of discussion, okay? Okay.
Well, the rest of the world is also having to deal with that administration. So let's switch topics from there. So I want to, in particular, respond to the question about what you called fear-mongering. But I also have very brief inputs into the other questions. I sometimes give presentations at high schools. And one of the first times I did that, at some point, a young girl, 12 years, she came up to me and she said, so sir, is there any hope? And that breaks my heart. And there's a lot of psychological, sociological research, really good research in the literature that points to the fact that if you don't speak to an academic audience like we do now, but to the general public, then it is not effective to only talk about the risks and the impacts and the negative consequences of warming. It is only effective if you do this and at the same time or immediately after talk about the solutions and what we can do together to fix these problems or to address these problems. So I've done that a little bit in my presentation to end with everything that we can do with faith-based organizations to try to address these problems. Unfortunately, the facts keep adding up in terms of the current climate crisis and the future crisis, and the future is not as far away as we may hope. We are very close to 1.5 degrees. We will get to 1.5 degrees in the next 10 years. We will get, if we don't have more and better actions globally, we will get to 2 degrees in just 30 or 40 years from now. Almost everybody in this room will have to deal with a global warming of 3 degrees if we get there. So it is not that far off, and it is, a lot of this is not just the future generations. So that message, I do believe, needs to be repeated. And also it's a matter of accumulating scientific evidence that we need to keep reporting on. I think that is our obligation as scientists.
Michiel, if I may interrupt, yeah. Do you want to respond to the adaptation gap, the last question, before we move to other question?
To which question, sorry?
Investment, remember the investment?
Yeah, that is as well. So the question about the private sector and what governments can do, it's a matter of the carrot and the stick. It's never the carrot or the stick. Governments have a huge potential portfolio to incentivize or disincentivize consumers and the private sector, and they need to make use of it. So that points also to one of the things that Frans said about law enforcement. So it's regulation, development of law, and law enforcement, and all of these things in many countries, including Indonesia, fall short of what is needed. So there are some really good laws in Indonesia. The question is it enforced? Is it undermined by, for example, corruption? And so a lot needs to be happening on that front. I just, to answer very briefly. And then one final point, and that is a question to the whole audience, and also Islam and other scholars. I'm curious about the question of meat and vegetarianism and where new technologies to produce food come in, such as cultured meat. Cultured meat, is it halal or not? Cultured meat is meat grown in a laboratory or an industrial facility which consumes 10 times less energy, 10 times less greenhouse gas emissions than, ordinary meat. So is it halal? Is it haram? Those questions also need to be answered.
Thank you, Michiel. Pak Frans and Ibu Im, would you mind responding to the question on religious and non-religious?
Yeah, but I wanted to also briefly
I'm sure, but
yeah, I will.
Very mad at me. Yeah?
I will address that. So the first question, indeed, the studies that I know, like the Kantar study, Purpose, React, our study, food and vegan items don't feature high. I mean, they are absent, I think. So you have a mission, I think, show that relationship that it is there because it is under investigated. The second question concerning language, I'm very convinced that if we talk about crisis, catastrophe, problem, that doesn't motivate people. So I think positive language, it is a challenge. We have a challenge, or there is an issue there. So I think alarming language doesn't motivate people to act. Third, the law, that, as Michiel said already, that is very important. I think I see two problems here. Decentralization and compartmentalization of the government. Your government is so complex. I mean, so many ministries, so many regulations. One ministry says this, the other ministry says the opposite. I give you the example of Citarum River project that I was involved in. Very good legislation, yeah, but not implemented. There is a national law on mining, and the provincial legislation does exactly the opposite. So that is something that I really see as an issue to be addressed when we think in terms of law and policy making. Now, concerning the religious and the non-religious, well, by the way, the distinction is as I said already, is a bit strange in a country where you think that overwhelmingly people are religious, so you think that religious values are taken into account. Well, seemingly they don't, at least not in the REACT study, not in our study. But yeah, the good news is that basically the differences are not that big. That is one of the findings in the REACT study. That is also one of the findings in the HAM study. I think that is a positive message also, by the way, for dialogue and interaction. I mean, social interaction. We interact as human beings. And religion might be taken into account or not. Yeah, as I said in my introduction, or in my presentation, we try to explain our findings from this two-layered model that we say. Our reaction toward nature is an anthropological constant. This context independent in that sense. I don't relate to nature because I'm Catholic or Muslim or Dutch or Indonesian. I primarily react as a human being, although I may frame that if I'm religious or very religious, I may use the Khalifa ID or another ID to express that deeper attitude. I think that is positive because that, for me, that is a solid ground for collaboration, collaboration at different levels.
Thank you, Frans. Ibu Im?
Yeah, I think I will only answer the question on inter-ideology.
But that's very important, very good.
Yeah, when you see the finding on religious conservatism, you shows the consistent, significant negative associations. So the higher the level of religious conservatism, the lower the level of the lower of the frequency of having collaboration with interfaith groups on environment. So in the context of religious conservatism, we use several indicators. In those indicators include how the individual worldviews in looking at religion in relation to the value of religion itself, the theological aspect of the religion, and relation to the politics, the relationship between religion and state, and also in the context of religion and gender. So it's accumulate those indicators. So if you like said, how about those who have, rejecting feminism, something like that. So in that analysis shows that those who hold those conservative views tend to have less interactions. So it could be hindering, the probability of having more fluid conversation or even a collaboration with people of different religions. But to specific on ideology, unfortunately, I haven't really analyzed this, but actually we have questions on ideology, so I think you give me an inspiration to run off and look at the findings, how the ideology matters. Thank you, Bu Aninda.
Okay. To those who haven't had the opportunity to ask questions, don't worry, the speakers are still with us. The thing is, you are not recorded here, but you can do it bilaterally with the speakers. I have some notes, but I will not say. Just leave all the richness of the discussion, stay with you. You have your own interpretation. I'm becoming less economist at the moment, going into more, postmodern kind of. So every interpretation are possible given of this. Now give Please give the speakers big applause. Ibu Ana, Pak Michiel, Pak Frans, Ibu Im, Pak Iyad, thank you very much. I'll give it to you, Pak. Yes, thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Soni Mumbunan, for chairing the session. We apologize due to the time constraints. We will shortly keep the keynote speakers just on stage so that we can present a token of appreciation from PPIM UIN Jakarta. It will be presented by Dr. Testriono himself. To Pak Testri. Jadi diserah-serahin aja dulu. Terus kita ke audiens. Everyone can stand, yeah. We'll just receive the token of appreciation, and then we'll take a quick photo together with the audience. To Pak Testri, silakan. To Professor Anna Gade. You can see this, okay? I'll just picture and then you close it. And you can remind up to this one, to the library. All right, round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, to our keynote speakers. To the speakers, we'll take a quick photo with the audience. So if you please just stand right in front of the audience right here, facing the screen so that our documentation team can take a picture. To all the audience, ladies and gentlemen, you may rise so that you can be included in this group photo.